Philosophy department.
That's correct.
Okay. We also have Dr. Peter Lyotta, who I think is going to stop by and talk to you guys probably once Khalil moves on after 10:30 because he has an appointment. So we feel very fortunate to have, these are two premier experts. They speak all around the country, speak at West Point, travel throughout the world, and when senators, and very important people need advice or input, they check with these type of experts from the Pell Center. I think at some point, Dr. Lyotta will talk to you a little bit about the Pell Center and what it can offer to you guys as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Joe, that was a very generous introduction. First of all, welcome to Salve. I think this is your first time here. Really? Did anyone apply here? Good for you. Have you heard?
What? Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Hopefully you will decide to come after this or not. That would reflect poorly on me. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about today. Sorry. This is the first time I've lectured in this building, and every building has different set of acoustics, so forgive me if I'm discovering now how loud the echo is. As Joe said, my name is Dr. Khalil Habib. I teach in the philosophy department, and starting this fall, I will be the director of the honors program. And what you're going to hear today is something like what our students are going to receive moving forward. And what that is our honors program is split up into two components. Most of you are probably aware that in most honors programs, it's either completely Western Civ oriented, meaning you begin with the Bible, you read some Plato, you read some Aristotle, but you might not read anything contemporary, or you have other honor programs where you read primarily contemporary works, meaning people are still alive, they're not necessarily dead white men. You might be reading journalists to current scholarship on post-colonial problems in so-and-so country. What we're going to do here, and I think this will be an introduction to my introduction to Islam and democracy, is we're a hybrid of both. Dr. Lyotta and I and several other faculty members got together this year and decided that what we're going to do is take an essentialist approach. So most of our courses are going to be with the essential texts of Western Civ. Dr. Lyotta is an expert, for example, among other things, on Dante, Virgil, Homer. And what we would like to do and see is and you'll see why when I get into this paper, which I'm not going to read, by the way. I'm going to try to just speak to you as much as possible. And so we will have, for example, Dr. Lyotta teaching those kinds of courses. I will be teaching courses in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Khaldun. And the reason is because of Senator Pell, which Dr. Lyotta will tell you a little bit about later. Our goal at the honors program is to create a citizen who is educated and who wishes, regardless of his or her major, to go out and have an impact in the world. But in order to do that, you have to be educated, and not just in Western Civ, in my opinion. You also have to be educated in things that are of contemporary interest, but also non-Western. I'm using these terms, frankly, against my will, because I don't even believe those distinctions really exist, Western, non-Western. For example, Ibn Khaldun, an Islamic thinker, but he's also an Aristotelian. Halfway through his work, it's quite obvious he knows the pre-Socratics, and he's quoting from other so-called cultures, which no one would consider Western. So I don't know where to draw that line between Western and non-Western, but I say it because it's a term I think most of you are familiar with. In any event, so what you're hearing now is something like what you would get at the end of the 4 years here at Salve, and I know this sounds like a shameless pitch to the university, and it's not. I just want to give you an understanding of why I'm approaching the issue of democracy and Islam from this fashion. Well, what is it? What are we going to talk about today? I'd like to focus on a thinker named Ibn Khaldun. He was born in 1332, and he died in 1406. He was born in Tunis. Why am I interested in someone who is not necessarily a dead white male, he's a dead olive-skinned male? Why am I interested in this guy? Well, primarily for two reasons. Well, three. One, I'm interested in his thought for its own sake. But also, if you are aware of, say, 9/11 and the subsequent war in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were certain assumptions that led us to both places, not the least of which are serious assumptions about democracy and where it can and cannot take root. Why I find Ibn Khaldun so helpful is he corrects two reigning prejudices that I do not agree with. And I'll take a strong position today, partly for a conversation's sake. I want you to think about it and talk to me about it. There are two positions, frankly, in the aftermath of 9/11 that predominate the discourse out in Washington and academia. I believe both are wrong. I think whenever you have extremes of any kind, there's usually an element of truth, and then the rest you can pretty much get rid of, because it's usually not right, not accurate. Well, what are these two? I don't mean to be offensive, I just want to be clear and direct. The first is called neoconservatism. You've probably heard this term, neocon. It means a lot of things. But for our purposes, it really means one thing. Neocon is the view that democracy is better protected when you spread democracy abroad. Now, for example, you all remember when Sarah Palin was asked, what do you think of the Bush Doctrine? Do you remember that? I think it was with Charlie Gibson, and she said, well, what do you mean? Well, in some ways, she was actually quite correct, because the Bush Doctrine was not a doctrine he officially put forward, nor did it come out of actually his cabinet. A writer named Charles Krauthammer gave the term Bush Doctrine, and he actually meant 3 or 4 different things, because it changed. Well, what does it really mean for our purposes? In short, it means this. Democracy is a good thing. Democracy is the only form of government that can protect and safeguard our private liberties, our private property, our ability to speak openly, free speech. But it's under constant pressure today. We were attacked at 9/11 because of the fundamental principles that we hold in this country. Look at how symbolic the attacks were. Anyone here familiar with Genesis, Tower of Babel? How hubristic it was for man to come together and build a tower to the heavens with brick and mortar, bringing technology, logos together, technology, mixing brick and mortar with their efforts, and they said they want to make a name for themselves. And so they built a tower. And it was a cosmopolitan tower, because prior to that, there was no such thing as nations. We were all one people. In fact, there weren't even Jews. They were just humans. God did not like that. Building a skyscraper to the heavens where you can wave to God and say, hey, we're equals. God is not a Democrat. He didn't like that. And so they struck that down. They also struck the Pentagon. Places where human beings take it upon themselves to govern themselves. So what happened was, this movement really gained momentum. This belief that if you want to satisfy our liberties and our citizens who want to live in peace and in prosperity, there's only one way you can avoid such attacks, and that is to spread democracy. Because no two democracies, as far as we know, have ever really had a war against each other. Now, they may have been ticked off at some point, but they, for the most part, because they value the same things and need each other as trading partners, they tend to be allies and not really at each other's throats. So, what's the problem with this? Well, they tried to institute democracy in Iraq. How's it going? You don't have to follow the day-to-day. Is it going well? Yeah, not really. And what happened with this is the belief that you can just transplant ideas about equality, about the separation of powers, separation of church and state, and you can just sort of send them off anywhere into lunar orbit. And you can have democracy maybe even on the moon and on Mars. We found out very quickly, and it's costing American lives, and it's costing a lot of money, and a lot of credibility, that you can't just simply do that. So that's one extreme, okay? And it's being corrected, frankly, through history and through experience. It's not working. Maybe it's true that you can best safeguard democracy by spreading democracy, but if it's not true that you can't simply spread democracy, then maybe democracy is going to have to learn to live in the world with enemies, right? Maybe that's the only alternative. Who knows? I'm not a prophet, I'm not a fortune teller, but I can tell you, based on the evidence that I see, it's not that easy. Furthermore, a woman by the name of Amy Chua, C-H-U-A, she's a professor at Yale Law School, wrote a wonderful book called World on Fire, in which she argues, and frankly, I argued the same thing before her book was published on that. You see how petty academics are? She argued that all our foreign policy does when we think we're spreading democracy elsewhere is it takes a good thing that doesn't look very good to us, but it turns out it's the best they can do, tears it down, and all it does is bring to rise a dictator. So you tear down your traditions, democracies don't in fact come to the surface, and what you end up having is some kind of despotism. And so she goes through various continents, and she shows how this happens repeatedly, that our own foreign policy is frankly at odds with our own self-interest. It's a wonderful book. Okay, so what's the second extreme prejudice that I don't agree with? And by the way, when I say I don't agree with it, I have what I believe is evidence. It's not just me mouthing off, although it might sound like it. The second is so the first is the right. The second, I believe, comes from the left, and that is that the United States is to be blamed for all of the ills of the world. How many of you have seen that kind of prejudice? There's no doubt about it. We're not angels, okay? We're not saints by any stretch. But this view argues that the reason why they hate us, how many of you have heard this? Please, show of hands. How many of you have heard this? The reason why they hate us is because our policy. Right, you've heard this. And then they give you a litany of policies, all of which, if you were to fulfill, would undermine American economics, right? Political hegemony. But what if I could show you that the same problems that irritate them were actually taking place in the 14th century? That predates the existence of which country? The United States. If I could show you that, and it's not coming from an American perspective, because America wasn't around then, but coming from an Islamic perspective, would that have some credibility? You see what I'm saying? So why do we make these mistakes? I believe for one major reason. We are illiterate. I know you can all read. But we are illiterate in the sense of the books that count. This is an essential text. Now, Peter, forgive me, I know I'm sounding like I'm preaching our honors program. But this is a primary, essential text that if you do not come into contact with in your 4 years of college, you're going to go out and be forced to take a choice between a neoconservative and a liberal. And guess what? They're either really accurate. Now, like I said, they both have some truth to them. Whenever you have an extreme, there's always something. Now, obviously, America hasn't done some good things. We bailed after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And we kind of have a history of abandoning our allies, okay? That you can't argue with, that has happened, okay? But it's not simply the case that this deep-seated issues really just started when America was born. They actually predated.